People don't always understand fairy tales. Fairy tales, like most genres of narrative, are interpretive. They rely on an audience to have meaning. An author might have an intention for a piece and its goals or meanings, but they don't have final say in what a story means. So when we look at a story as a scholar, we need to consider both the initial intention and the meaning divorced from that intention. And sometimes they're far apart. Take, for example, the show designed to sell these dolls. It isn't too hard to tell what the point of a cartoon made by a toy company is. It's to sell these things. And in a sense, Ever After High did its job. After all, I bought one of these a decade later, after they stopped selling them, because I was making a video. But they did manage to get me to buy my favorite one, Cerise Hood, the daughter of Red Riding Hood. I'm not sure why Cerise is my favorite. It could be because I have always been fascinated with the classic fairy tale and its metaphorical depiction of the simultaneous attraction and fear posed by approaching maturity, set against a metaphorical and literal predator utilizing manipulation and physical force to get what he wants. Or it might be that Cerise is portrayed as the sporty tomboy, and that's one of the type of girls I liked when I was a teenager. But that's kind of the point of the show from a marketing perspective. Mattel gets to take advantage of known characters with established stories and appeal with a long cultural history for free. And then by making the dolls the children of these characters and giving them basic familiar stock character types, the company owns original characters their audience is familiar with in both a classical fairy tale sense and a modern relatable character sense. The show makes familiar characters who sell dolls. Easy money. But something odd happens when you look past that and consider the other messages the audience can take away from the show. Ever After High is an exceptionally queer show, and I mean that in every definition of the word. A cartoon designed to sell fashion dolls to an audience of children built on the massive success of a previous line of dolls, Monster High, developed for the web and ultimately ported over to Netflix for 5 short seasons. If you aren't familiar with Ever After High, I'll be talking about the Netflix series specifically. It's a children's animated drama focused on the high school-aged children of classic fairy tale characters. Towards the end of their education, these children sign a magical book, the Storybook of Legends, which basically acts as a magical contract causing the children to live out the same story as their parents. The main character, Raven Queen, daughter of the Evil Queen, which I guess is her legal name? Raven Queen doesn't want to live out her story for a few reasons, but primarily because she doesn't identify with being evil. Across 3 seasons, the show deals somewhat directly with the book, then one season continues the theme while facing the Evil Queen directly, before the last season ceases to follow the main characters or story and goes a completely different direction with an underwhelming climax, and is about a completely new character learning to tie her shoes. I'm not joking. If you immediately have questions about the setting and its rules, welcome to the show. It's all questions. How long is society repeated generations? Unexplained. What happens if a fairy tale character doesn't have children? Unexplained. Why does the White Rabbit from Wonderland look like a cartoon rabbit and his daughter look like a furry? That one might explain itself. Why does this setting have a rule where implicitly brothers and sisters have to marry each other? Please don't ask. But that's the fun of the series. The show is so fun because it doesn't offer answers. It probably doesn't even have answers to offer. Ever After High is a maddening spiral of questions and half-thought-out ideas, which makes it perfect for one of my favorite games, trying to make logical systems out of property that clearly didn't care. I don't claim to know, but I think it's clear the show was written to make a profit, and wasn't thinking about messaging outside of fashionable girls who rebel against their parents are popular with our target demographic. And yet, the fact that the show isn't about anything means that it can be interpreted as almost anything. But before I give some examples, since you made it this far, please consider liking, subscribing, or donating to my Ko-fi page. All of those things really help, and I'm planning on uploading shorter videos to my Ko-fi that you won't be able to access here, so you'll want to be able to check that out and make sure you don't miss them. Ever After High lends itself to a weirdly wide range of interpretations. One rule of the setting is that every character is either a royal or a rebel, poorly defined groups that largely divide characters who are heroes or royalty from characters who are villains and commoners. Apple White and Daring Charming, the children of Snow White and Prince Charming, are royals. Cerise Hood, the daughter of Red Riding Hood, is a rebel. The main character, Raven Queen, is a rebel because a villain overwrites being literally named Queen, I guess? The format of two distinct groups which form the society, royals and rebels, lends itself to a Marxist analysis of class, examining the expectations and quality of life of these classes. Alternatively, Pinocchio's daughter has a condition preventing her from lying. She literally cannot lie because of a curse. When the school assigns her to tell a tall tale, she has to receive a special accommodation to complete the assignment, finding a true story so unbelievable that it seems like a lie. This is an incredibly unfair alternate assignment, and also opens the door to disability studies, a branch of humanities studies about how disability is represented and treated within human societies. The text of the show is so unfocused that any goofy moment can be analyzed through a literary lens. The lens which I find most interesting, however, is the lens of queer theory. I want to quickly discuss what queer theory is and what it isn't before getting into the meat of this argument. Queer theory is a branch of humanities studies examining people and groups which go against societal expectations, usually focusing on sexuality, gender identity, and identity expression. It's a massive and diverse field ranging from study of individuals and their expression to how people who don't fit societal expectations form their own communities. When applied to literature, we specifically use the study of queer identities and ideas to find meaning in stories. Queer theory is not shipping or forcing queerness on characters, though sometimes assumptions are made, but made based on evidence provided in the text. Basically, I'm not here to point out that everyone in the show is gay. That wouldn't be adding depth to the conversation, and it'd be really easy. I mean, really easy. Like, I don't even have to try. What I am here to do is argue that looking at the story, its themes, and characters through the lens of queer studies causes something interesting to happen. When viewed through a queer lens, Ever After High offers a lesson in the pressures to be normal and the values in resisting normalization. As I mentioned earlier, the central fantasy of the setting is that the characters sign a book in school which states that they will pledge their destiny to follow the same stories their parents did. This is a clever and simple writing trick to appeal to the young female audience of the show. The adults want them to be like their parents, rebellious teens want to be their own people. It's a tried and true recipe for appealing to youths, but by literalizing the expectation in this magical book, the story becomes a story of cultural expectations, not just parental ones. The first season in particular, and sections of the second through fourth seasons, deal with Raven's relationship with these expectations. The first and second seasons give writing credit to George Jody IV, which, if I can take a moment here, George, if you are by some miracle watching this, I have to know, was writing this show as about a teenager rebelling against becoming a copy of their parents, an emotional exploration of your feelings about being the fourth George Jody? Also, thanks for writing Scooby-Doo, Where's My Mummy? I watched this with my parents on Mother's Day. While I don't think it was Doty's or any of the other executives from Mattel's intent, Raven Queen serves as a metaphor for a queer character. Again, not that she is queer, that's a separate argument that others can and have made. Rather, her story and the way society treats her are similar to common queer experiences which teenagers might go through. Consider this list. Raven is expected to be like everyone else, but doesn't feel the same way. She is told that if she doesn't follow the rules, she won't exist. Her friends and mentors try to convince her that it's better for her own safety to sign the book. Principal Grimm tries to stop her ideas from spreading. Perhaps the most familiar scene to a queer person would be the intervention scene. Though it is largely played for laughs, this short moment of a group of concerned friends trying to help get her back on the right path is an all too real moment of confrontation and peer pressure. While queer tolerance and acceptance are much more common these days, many of these moments may feel familiar to queer folks my age or who grew up in a conservative-leaning town. Raven faces prejudices, manipulation, and sometimes direct lies in order to convince her that she should fall in line with the rules, even if they don't match with what she feels. Raven's desire for a different life than is expected is explained as dangerous, non-existent, and selfish. Basically, the only thing she isn't told is that it's just a phase. Signing the storybook and doing what's expected of you is unquestioned before her, and it is assumed to be the way that things are and should be. Signing the book is the norm. Normalization consists, first of all, in positing a model, an optimal model that is constructed in terms of a certain result, and the operation of disciplinary normalization consists in trying to get people, movements, and actions to conform to this model. The normal being precisely that which can conform to this norm, and the abnormal that which is incapable of conforming to the norm. In other words, it is not the normal and the abnormal that is fundamental and primary in disciplinary normalization, it is the norm. Now you see why you need a master's to start to understand some of this stuff. This is just an excerpt of him summarizing it actually for a speech. The actual book exploring this concept is 318 pages long. Basically what he's saying is that a norm is a model, an example to be followed. Something that is normal follows that expectation. A normal person gets a job, a normal person plans to marry and have children. Normal people follow societal norms. We are taught that deviating from the norm, not following the story, is dangerous. The abnormal is to be mistrusted. Norms are a societal tool to teach discipline and enforce a sense of belonging to a larger group. In Ever After High, the signing is the norm, literally. The book is a model which the characters are expected to follow, and not doing so is dangerous. So what does this have to do with queer theory? Well, as some of you might have realized, queer culture and studies are extremely connected to the idea of breaking norms. There isn't anything inherently rule-breaking about being gay, or bi, or trans, or NB, or A-spec. These are natural and healthy ways of expressing yourself and your identity. It's just that for hundreds of years, Western civilization has been trained that they're abnormal and bad. The hetero, the cis, the allo are all cultural norms in the US. Thus the term heteronormative. The cultural definition of normal is defined by straightness. Many other cultures and times have not followed these strict rules or have had their own, but modern queer theory and culture developed as a study not only of sex and gender, but also as a study of rules and breaking them. In Ever After High, then, signing the book is a norm. Raven challenges that norm by questioning its necessity. As soon as she does, everyone who's been trained to follow this norm sees her as dangerous or in danger. Raven feels so queer partially because she challenges a cultural assumption that she must be evil purely because she doesn't feel like she is evil. She is basically coming out as good in the way that someone in our world might come out as trans, challenging a societal assumption. By rejecting the norm and embracing anti-normative behavior, she becomes a stand-in for a queer character, one who rejects the villain role assigned to her, embracing the good role she has always identified with. This causes Raven to, in a sense, act as a response to the queer-coded villain, a trope with a long history in Western film and animation. The queer and breaking societal rules are linked in Western society, whether or not they should be, and this is partially true of history in American film. In 1930, the film industry faced a massive change in its ability to tell stories. The industry had been completely unchecked, and much like novels before them and comics and video games after, came under heavy public scrutiny. The public was worried about the dangerous and lewd images that the new medium provided, and fearing government action, the Motion Picture Association censored itself. The Hays Code banned many things, like villains winning and making criminal activity seem appealing. But it also banned the portrayal of queer characters and other, quote, perverse topics, close quote. For the first time, filmmakers had to adhere to a set of moral guidelines in order to preserve an audience. Under the Hays Code, you might expect films to become boring and safe, and some did, but these restrictions also inspired some filmmakers to find creative ways around them. Film genres like noir arose, exploring the corruption of urban spaces, and unable to portray queer characters directly, many films turned to queer coding. Films like The Maltese Falcon would have villains that wore perfume and white gloves, or hold canes and other phallic objects. And just like The Maltese Falcon, many of these portrayals would fall upon the villain of the piece. Some of this may have been out of malice, other times it was simply the only way possible to make a villain queer-coded, as code enforced proper, normal, masculine men as heroes. This was the beginning, at least for American film, of the queer-coded villain. For most people watching this video, queer-coded villains probably bring to mind the Disney villains of the Renaissance era. The sarcastic Brit Scar and the drag-performing Ursula. These are perfect examples of cartoon queer-coded villains. And for some queers and many allies, these characters are seen as problematic and damaging. That can make it surprising when the queer community rises up to complain about how a villain was rewritten to take all the coding away. The entirely uncatty Jafar from the live-action Aladdin may not be a stereotype, but God is he boring. I love the Disney villains and all their queer glory, and a lot of other people do as well. So why? And what does any of this have to do with Ever After High? The queer-coded villain, especially in media aimed at young or family audience, has become ingrained in American culture, and though it certainly has its problems, these villains offer, at least the way I see it, a bit of empathetic escapism. Disney villains, particularly in the Renaissance, were a massive part of the film, and stood in stark contrast to the heroes. Disney heroes follow norms, not in every way, but they represent the values of their time. Seeing a queer villain stand out, unshackled, unafraid of who they are, and willing to overturn every norm to get what they want can be extremely freeing for someone who might not relate as well to the heroes. We don't want to see the villain win because ultimately we don't want to overthrow all the good things, but seeing someone be who they are unapologetically and break all the rules we might be worried about ourselves can be freeing. For around a decade, and honestly even before, these queer villains dominated the animated fairy tale stories not long before the development of Ever After High, and that reflects in the show. Raven Queen is a rebel, not just literally in the show, but also in the context of her culture. Raven, sometimes apologetically, wants the right to be herself and not have to be what society tells her is normal. She doesn't want to sign the Storybook of Legends, a literal manifestation of the norm. So even though she isn't coded lesbian all of the time, Raven is a product of the queer-coded villain. She is relatable because she challenges the norms, but not in the same way villains do. She is heroic, empathetic. She wants to break the norm that says she should be evil, which means she can still be the main character of the series while keeping that cool, rebellious, rule-breaking energy. Throughout the first several seasons of the show, Raven instigates anti-normative thought. In the earliest moments of the show, she complains about the norms. She questions them and the consequences of defying those expectations. By the end of the first half an episode, she's violated the most important cultural rule in the school, possibly the entire society. Raven risks her own existence and, honestly, everyone in her stories for the sake of her desire to not be evil. It's Raven who introduces the idea, who causes other students to start questioning their normativity. She's radical, literally. Raven actively stands against the expectations of her society, and the choice to make her the daughter of the evil queen massively impacts the perception of her. We've covered how, in the first season, Raven rejects her destiny and challenges the norms of society. Throughout that season, we see the idea spread. Soon other characters start questioning their relationships with the norms, and for different reasons. Ashlyn Ella, daughter of Cinderella, is dating a rebel, and doesn't want to lose that relationship. This becomes the central issue in the Valentine's episode, where Ashlyn comes out as dating her rebel boyfriend. Briar Rose, Sleeping Beauty, doesn't want to lose her friends while sleeping for 100 years. If Mattel will let me listen to the discussion these two have.
This what it's gonna be like when I sleep for 100 years? Well, I'm gonna miss out on all the fun and my friends.
You always knew this was gonna happen. You haven't signed the Storybook of Legends yet. You wouldn't be the first person to question your destiny. I mean, I already signed, and I kinda wish I hadn't. Who knows what's gonna happen to Hunter and me?
So you're saying I shouldn't sign? I should rebel?
I'm saying that you have choices.
Notice the use of the term question your destiny. This quiet moment is a moment of one character, Ashlyn, who is sort of out of the closet at this point, offering a chance out for Briar as well. You don't have to sign the book, you have options. As both characters question their queerness, we see a moment of empathy and resistance spreading. Both of these characters feel a difference between what they want for themselves and what society wants for them. Briar's fears of losing her connection to the other girls, and Ashlyn's desire for a taboo relationship, challenge the cultural norms of this fairy tale world. One person coming out as queer, challenging norms, makes others who have quietly questioned it themselves more confident, more certain of their own identities. Testing the boundaries of a norm can inspire others to do the same, which from one perspective is incredibly empowering, and from another is threatening. Raven faces pressures in many forms to stop resisting and simply follow the rules. Through personal intervention, coursework designed to correct her good behavior, and even manipulative actions taken by the headmaster, we watch as Raven resists, sometimes questions herself, and ultimately earns the trust and respect of her friends. In resisting, Raven makes a new space for new queer resistance. Though Raven makes the first act of resistance, other characters make choices as well. Perhaps the most impactful action against the norms is a direct act against the Storybook of Legends itself. At the end of the first season, Briar Rose makes a decision which defines the following two narrative arcs. Briar finds the real Storybook of Legends, which has been replaced with a fake for the first season, and throws the book into a well, too afraid to decide whether to sign the book or not. This well transports the book to Wonderland for the third season. And in doing this, Briar chooses not to sign the book, but in that way maintains her anonymity. In other words, she remains closeted. Briar rejects her destiny, the social expectation, but not in a visible, active way like Raven and Ashlyn have. As a point of clarity, I'm not against being closeted. Obviously, I'm not too loud about my own queerness, largely for personal reasons and due to the conservative-leaning city I live in. But some folks are in real danger if they come out, so being closeted can be the most healthy option until we're in a safer place as queers. The framing of the story and the queer lens we were analyzing through put Briar in the unfortunate position of seeming like a coward and harming others by being closeted, but that isn't the argument I intend to make here. Sometimes analysis isn't perfect. What I do want to focus our attention on is the ties between Briar's story and the closeted experience. Briar experiences disparity between her desires and the desires she is expected to have. Her drive particularly is not to lose her friends during her destined sleep. Those friends, however, especially Apple, don't value or understand her reasoning. If she follows the norms, signs the book, she loses them. But she's afraid of losing her friends if she's open as well. Taking the option of remaining closeted is the only way to maintain those friends as far as she sees. Briar doesn't want to be accepted for her difference, for her queerness, she just wants it to not ruin her life. Being closeted is a safe choice. It allows queer folk to stay safe when friends or family might not approve. Eventually, Briar can come out when the time is right, but she doesn't have to now. Briefly, this is a major piece of why Ever After High feels queer, not just rebellious. Queerness, unlike many other minorities, can be hidden. Most people can't display as another race or sex without extreme measures. These parts of a person's identity are very visible. Queerness isn't always. Some queers remain closeted, only opening up to those close to them. Some are passing, looking and behaving enough like cis-hetero folks to blend in. These options don't easily exist for other minorities like social class, race, etc. Because Briar can hide her resistance to the rules, the story reads as more queer than it does any other act of resistance against a norm or system of power. And I guess that's the end of the video. I'm not covering the latter seasons in this essay, and that covers the whole Storybook of Legends section, except for the end of Season 3, but that's only like 5 minutes of plot. It's fine to skip, right? Right? Season 3, titled Way to Wonderland, is the worst season of the show. There's a pattern in the series where the best seasons have an adult as the main antagonist, and the worst seasons have another kid as the main antagonist. Here's a picture of this season's antagonist. She isn't the daughter of any real character from Alice in Wonderland, and has no tie to the main characters, and runs the school in Wonderland because, Wonderland logic is silly. Wonderland itself is a messy hodgepodge of quickly tiresome backgrounds, weak visual puns. I escaped this T-cube by thinking outside the box, and a weird subplot about how Apple and Raven are now opposites because Apple is science-y and Raven is creative. It's bad and hollow, and thankfully we don't have to talk about it except for the last few minutes. The main thrust of the season is a totally new rule that anyone can sign someone else's page in the book and steal their destiny. Courtly Jester, that villain I showed earlier, tries to steal the Queen of Hearts' destiny and maybe Raven's, but Raven chooses to sign the book and gain her full powers. Does any of this matter or even tie in well with the queer framework? No! This season is written by different writers and you can feel it. What does matter is that in the final minutes of the season, Briar comes out to Apple and Raven, and the three decide to destroy the storybook, giving everyone control over their destinies. The fact that the three of them decide without consent to force free will on everyone aside, this final act represents the end of the norm. The set of rules and expectations has been examined, and the girls realize that these rules can be manipulated by greedy, corrupt people. The expectations aren't all that they're cracked up to be, and so they abolish them. Queerness is the new normal. People are free to choose for themselves, not just be what is expected of them. There are still problems. 2 seasons dealing with Raven's mother and an evil Snow King. Both of these seasons are directly tied to concerns over the new free will. Apple's fear of losing a happily ever after, and Prince Charming's confusion over his kiss not saving Apple in the 4th season. And that might be the best takeaway here. There's something thrilling about overcoming the norms and being different. There's a satisfaction in the conclusion that everyone is free to be themselves now. But that doesn't mean there won't still be struggles. As being LGBTQIA+ becomes more common, we have to recognize that there will still be haters, expectations, and problems. By and large, queer theorists are actually very anti-normative, finding value in the action of queer resistance, of not becoming the norm. Ultimately, it's up to each of us, not just the queer of us, but all of us to decide if we are comfortable being normal or being abnormal, whether we sign the book or resist. And I think that's my interpretation of this series. It's a queer little series about fairy tale characters that, against all odds, shows the risks and rewards of queer resistance, the highs and lows of liberation, closetedness, and the dangers of forcing a new normal on people who are comfortable in their very current norms. There isn't exactly a moral, but there's something to be taken away. It's like a fairy tale in that way. Most people confuse the roles of fairy tales with fables or parables. There are a lot of differences, but one of the most important is the role they serve. Fables and parables deliver morals. They often end with an explanation of the lesson. So when you read Aesop's fables or Christian parables, the purpose is to use narrative to simplify a complex message. We often think of fairy tales as having a moral as well, but that really isn't their purpose. Fairy tales are stories for entertainment and culture more than they are lessons. In the original Snow White, there isn't a moral or even something for the main character to learn. Snow White is pretty and good. She's rewarded with a marriage, and the witch is evil, so she's forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she dies. People can extrapolate a message about jealousy, but that isn't the goal. Entertaining an audience is the goal. Lots of fairy tales are just stories. There isn't a message to Jack and the Beanstalk or Rapunzel. They're just entertaining stories you can take a message away from. I think that's particularly appropriate for Ever After High. It's a stupid, silly show without a real message, and yet you can make meaning with it. Ever After High isn't a work of narrative genius, it's just kids' entertainment that you can make meaning out of. It's a modern-day queer fairy tale. Thanks so much for joining me on this video. It's been a long ride. I've been working on this for ages in the middle of teaching students. So thank you very much if you've stuck around and enjoyed. Feel free to share your thoughts or concerns for my sanity if you like. And be sure to share, like, subscribe, and donate to my Ko-fi. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, all of that stuff helps. But thanks for joining me and my silly little TV show, and have a good one. Bye!